The morning my grandmother's attorney called to tell me I was the sole heir to her beach house, and the 43 acres surrounding it, I was standing in my kitchen in a bathrobe, eating cereal over the sink. That's the part nobody pictures when they imagine inheriting something. They picture candlelit offices, mahogany desks, a lawyer sliding a leather folder across to you while you sit composed in a blazer. They don't picture soggy Cheerios and bare feet on cold tile and the strange, hollow feeling of being told something enormous while your whole body is still half asleep. My grandmother had died 11 days earlier. A stroke, quick and quiet the way she always said she wanted to go. She was 81 years old and had spent every summer of her life at that beach house on the Georgia coast. And she had spent the last 3 years of her life making absolutely sure I knew exactly where everything was, what everything meant, and who was supposed to have what when she was gone. I knew because she told me. We talked about it the way other grandmothers and granddaughters talk about recipes. What I did not know, what none of us knew until that Tuesday morning phone call, was that my uncle had been telling everyone in the family for the better part of a decade that the property was going to him. My grandmother's beach house sat at the end of a private road on Tybee Island, just outside Savannah. It was not a mansion, it was not some grand estate. It was a 5-bedroom cottage with white clapboard siding, and a wraparound porch and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and salt air and the vanilla candles she bought in bulk from a shop downtown. The floors creaked in a specific pattern that I had memorized before I could read. There was a swing on the back porch that faced the water, and my grandmother had sat in that swing every evening for as long as I could remember, watching the light go off the Atlantic, her hands wrapped around a mug even in July. The property had been in her family since the 1950s. Her parents had bought it for almost nothing, back when the island was still mostly fishermen and retirees and people who wanted to be left alone. By the time she died, it was worth somewhere north of $2 million. Maybe more, depending on who you asked and how much they wanted it. My uncle wanted it. He had always wanted it. And somewhere along the way he had convinced himself, and apparently my mother, and my aunt, and half of my extended family, that wanting it badly enough made it his. I was 31 years old when all of this happened. I had been living in Savannah for 4 years, working as a licensed occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center about 20 minutes from my grandmother's house. I visited her twice a week, sometimes more. I drove her to her cardiologist appointments. I sat with her through the bad weeks when her arthritis made it hard to hold a pen, and I helped her write the Christmas cards she still insisted on sending by hand to 70-something people on a list she'd been maintaining since 1987. My uncle lived in Charlotte. He visited at Thanksgiving, sometimes Christmas, and occasionally sent flowers on her birthday that arrived 2 days late. I am not saying this to be cruel. I am saying this because it matters. It matters in a way that the rest of my family decided very quickly did not matter at all. The will was filed with the Chatham County Probate Court 3 weeks after she died. I was named sole beneficiary of the beach property and everything on it, including the furniture, the small boat she kept in the side yard, and a 1974 Ford pickup that my grandfather had restored before I was born and that my grandmother had kept running out of what I can only describe as loyalty. My uncle received a cash bequest of $50,000 and some jewelry that had belonged to his mother. My mother received the same. My aunt received a collection of first edition books that she had admired her whole life and a separate cash amount. Nobody received nothing. My grandmother was not cruel. She was precise. The problem, my uncle's problem, specifically, was that he had been telling people for years that the house was coming to him. He had told his wife, he had told his kids, he had apparently told people at his office, his neighbors, his church. He had built an entire future in his imagination around a piece of property that was never at any point promised to him. And when the will made that clear, he did not grieve the loss of an expectation. He decided the will was wrong. The first call came from my mother, 4 days after probate opened. "Your uncle is very upset," she said. She said it the way you'd report a weather condition, matter of fact. Like it was information I needed to prepare for, not something she had any opinion about herself. "I understand that," I said. "He feels like he was led to believe." "He was never led to believe anything," I said. "Grandma told him, she told all of us, that she was leaving the house to me. She told us at Easter 2 years ago. You were there." A pause. "He doesn't remember it that way." That was the first time I understood what I was dealing with. Not grief. not confusion. A deliberate reconstruction of events to support a conclusion he had already decided to reach. My uncle's name was never going to be on that deed, and some part of him had always known it. What he was doing now was not mourning. It was strategy. The letters from his attorney arrived 12 days later. He was contesting the will on the grounds of undue influence. His argument, laid out in 4 pages of careful legal language, was that I had manipulated my grandmother during a period of diminished capacity, that I had isolated her from the family and pressured her into changing a will that had previously left the property to him. There was no previous will leaving the property to him. His attorney was working with a story his client had told him, and his client had told a very specific, very detailed, entirely fictional version of the past 3 years of my grandmother's life. I sat at her kitchen table, my kitchen table now, though it didn't feel that way yet, and I read those 4 pages 3 times. Then I called my own attorney. Her name was Miss Thornton, and she had been practicing estate law in Savannah for 26 years, and when I finished reading her the relevant sections over the phone, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "All right, let's talk about what you have." What I had was considerable. My grandmother had been seen by her own estate attorney 18 months before her death for a routine will review. She had been evaluated as fully competent. Her physician had documented her mental status at every appointment for the past 4 years, because she had a family history of dementia and had specifically requested that her doctors keep records precisely in case something like this ever happened. She had told me once, sitting on that back porch swing, that she had watched her own mother's estate get fought over for 6 years after her death, and she was not going to let that happen to me. She had thought of everything. She had planned for the exact argument my uncle was now making, and she had documented her way around it years in advance. But documentation takes time to matter. In the meantime, my uncle did something I did not anticipate. I came home from work on a Thursday evening in early October to find my uncle's truck parked in the driveway. He was sitting on the front porch steps. His wife was in the truck. My cousin, his oldest son, who was 26 and had always been quiet and a little awkward around me, was standing near the side of the house with his hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. My uncle stood up when I got out of my car. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, the kind of person who takes up space naturally and has never had to think about it. He was 63 years old and he looked in that moment like he had not slept in a week. "We need to talk," he said. "You could have called," I said. "I tried." "You didn't answer." "I was at work." He looked at me for a long moment. There was something in his face that I recognized from when we were younger, before the distance, before the years of Thanksgiving visits, that felt like performances. Something that might have been the real version of him, underneath all the certainty and the entitlement. He looked tired. "She was my mother," he said. His voice cracked on the last word and he cleared his throat, hard. "This was her house. I grew up here, I know," I said, and I meant it. I did know. I had thought about that actually more than he probably realized. The fact that he had a claim on this place that was emotional and real and had nothing to do with legal documents or who had driven who to which appointments. The fact that loving something and being entitled to it are not the same thing had never felt like a comfortable distinction to me, even when it was the correct one. "Then why are you doing this?" he said. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm following her wishes." His jaw tightened. "She wasn't thinking clearly in those last years, you know that." "She absolutely was," I said. "And we both know that." He looked away, down the road toward the water you couldn't quite see from the driveway but could always hear. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm going to fight this, I know," I said. "I'm going to win." I didn't say anything to that. I went inside, locked the door, and stood in the kitchen for a while with the lights off, listening to his truck back out of the driveway. The legal process moved slowly the way all legal processes do, and in the meantime my uncle found other ways to apply pressure. My mother stopped returning my calls. My aunt, who had always been warm to me, sent a single text message asking me to think about what this is doing to the family, and then went silent. Cousins I had grown up with were suddenly unavailable. I would see posts on social media, family gatherings I wasn't invited to, holiday photos where everyone was smiling in a way that felt pointed, and I understood that a story was being told about me in rooms I wasn't in. The story was that I had stolen something. That I had manipulated an old woman, that I had been calculating, strategic, cold-hearted. None of those people knew me the way my grandmother had. But they knew my uncle, and my uncle was convincing, and grief makes people want someone to blame. What I did during those months was work. I went to the rehabilitation center every morning, and I helped people relearn how to button their shirts and hold their forks and say the names of their children. And when I came home in the evenings, I sat on my grandmother's back porch with a glass of wine and watched the water and thought about what she would tell me to do. She would tell me to be patient. She would tell me that the truth has a structural advantage over a lie, which is that it doesn't require maintenance. She would tell me to stop refreshing my phone. She would also tell me to keep every single document, every email, every text message, every voicemail, which I was doing. The deposition happened in February. I sat across a conference table from my uncle's attorney, a sharp-edged man named Mr. Calloway, who had the specific energy of someone who believed intimidation was a transferable skill from one context to any other. He asked me questions for 4 hours. He asked about my relationship with my grandmother, my finances, my motives, my character. He implied through very careful phrasing that never quite constituted a direct accusation that I was the kind of person who would take advantage of an elderly woman. I answered every question. I answered clearly, completely, and without editorializing. Miss Thornton had told me to behave as if every word I said was going to be read aloud to a jury, because it might be, and I had taken that instruction seriously. At one point, Mr. Calloway produced a document he suggested was an earlier draft of my grandmother's will, dated 5 years before her death, that named my uncle as the primary beneficiary of the real property. I looked at it, Miss Thornton looked at it, we asked for a copy. The signature on that document was my grandmother's. The notarization was my grandmother's. But the formatting was slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to be immediately obvious, but wrong in a specific way that suggested the document had been produced on software that hadn't existed in the year it was supposedly dated. I don't know how to describe the feeling of realizing in real time that someone in your family has forged a legal document. It isn't shock exactly. By then I had been through enough that I was somewhat past shock. It was more like a door opening onto a room you had suspected was there but had hoped wasn't. Ms. Thornton said nothing during the deposition. She made a note. She asked Mr. Calloway to provide the original document and the chain of custody for it. We drove back to her office in near silence. She told me we needed to make a call. The person she called was not another attorney. It was an investigator, a forensic document examiner who worked frequently with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and occasionally with federal agencies on cases involving estate fraud. His name was Mr. Aldridge, and he was methodical and quiet, and had the manner of someone who had been presented with human dishonesty so many times that nothing surprised him anymore, but all of it still, quietly, offended him. He took the document. He took 3 weeks to examine it. When he came back, his report was 42 pages long and concluded, with the specific language professionals use when they are certain of something but must still be precise about it, that the document was not what it claimed to be. The digital metadata embedded in the file from which it had been printed indicated it had been created 14 months ago, not 5 years ago. The notary whose stamp appeared on it had been contacted and had no record of the notarization. The notary had in fact retired from practice 8 years earlier. My uncle had submitted a forged document in a legal proceeding in the state of Georgia. This is a felony. Miss Thornton called the Chatham County District Attorney's Office. The forensic report went to the GBI. Mr. Aldridge filed an affidavit. The probate court was notified. My uncle's attorney withdrew from the case within 72 hours. These things happen quickly once an attorney understands the actual situation they are in. I did not know, when all of this was being set into motion, what the outcome would look like in practical terms. I knew what the law said. I knew what the evidence showed. What I didn't know was how it would feel. The moment when something that had been causing pain for months finally broke in the direction of the truth. It felt quieter than I expected. I was sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table. I had started thinking of it as mine, slowly, the way you ease into a warm bath, when Miss Thornton called to tell me that my uncle had been formally charged, that the will contest had been dismissed with prejudice, that the property was mine, uncontested, recorded in my name in the Chatham County deed records. I said thank you. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while after the call ended. Outside, the wind was coming off the water the way it always did in late March, warm and salt-heavy, pushing through the screens on the back porch. I could hear the swing moving against its chains. I thought about my grandmother sitting in that swing for 60 years. I thought about the Christmas cards and the cardiologist appointments, and the Easter 2 years ago when she had looked around the table at her children and her grandchildren and said, quietly and without drama, that she was leaving the beach house to me, and that she hoped everyone could accept that. I thought about how matter-of-fact she had been about it, and how certain, and how little she had needed anyone's approval to know that it was right. She had been the kind of woman who decided things and then lived inside those decisions without apology. I had always admired that about her. I was still learning it. My uncle pleaded no contest to the forgery charge 4 months later. His attorney, a new one, public defender level, because his resources had been substantially depleted by the civil litigation, negotiated a sentence that included 2 years of probation, a fine, and community service. He did not serve jail time. I was not asked whether I thought that was sufficient, and I made peace with not being asked. My mother called me the week after the plea. It was the first time we had spoken in almost 7 months. She did not apologize exactly. She said she had not understood the full picture. She said she hoped we could find a way forward. I told her I needed some more time. We left it there. My aunt sent a letter, an actual handwritten letter which felt deliberate and appropriate in a way that a text message wouldn't have. She said she was sorry. She said she had let herself be influenced by people whose version of events was more emotionally compelling than accurate, and she was ashamed of that. I wrote back. It took me 3 drafts to find the right register. Not warm, not cold, something in between, something that left a door open without swinging it wide. Some doors close. I have made my peace with that too. I am writing this from the back porch of the beach house on a Tuesday evening in October, exactly 1 year after my uncle showed up in the driveway. The swing is behind me. I have not sat in it yet, not because I can't, but because I am waiting for the moment when it feels like the right thing to do rather than a deliberate act. I have repainted the kitchen. I have fixed the step on the side porch that my grandmother said for 15 years she was going to fix and never did. I have learned which floorboards creak and where the draft comes from in February and how long it takes the hot water to reach the upstairs bathroom. I have started to understand that inheriting something from someone who loved you is not a simple gift. It is also a weight, a responsibility, a continuous conversation with someone who is no longer there to respond. My grandmother left me this place because she trusted me with it, because she believed I would know what it was for. I am still figuring out what it is for. I think that might be the work of a lifetime. What I do know is this: she was right to trust me. She was right about most things, actually, including the things I didn't understand at the time. She knew that the truth has a structural advantage over a lie. She knew that some people will spend enormous energy trying to take what they were never given. She knew that patience is not the same as passivity, and that documenting your way through life is not paranoia. It is the specific kind of care you owe to the people who will come after you and have to make sense of what you've left behind. She left me a beach house and a creaky swing and a pickup truck that still runs and a lesson I will be unpacking for the rest of my life. The wind is coming off the water. The sun is almost gone. The swing is moving behind me in the breeze, empty and waiting. I think I am ready to sit in it.